Good morning, everyone. Everybody awake? Everybody motivated? And yeah, sounds like it. So, my name is Jan Wildeboer, which is a Dutch name, but I live in Munich, in Germany. I work, as you can see, at Red Hat, which is a company that does a little thing with open source, quite a little thing. So when I started at Red Hat 12 years ago, 2005, we were 700 people worldwide. I was employee number 703, and we were doing a little bit of money with selling open source. And now, 12 years later, Red Hat is a company with 11,000 people worldwide, and we're doing $2 billion in revenue, still with selling free software, which is the most crazy thing you can do on this world. And I was invited here, and I'm very happy to be here. And first of all, my thanks to the organizers of the event for setting up everything and for making sure I got introduced to local Armenian beer yesterday, which was an experience, which is good. But I slept very long after that, so I'm really full awake now. And I was invited to explain not what Red Hat does, because that's boring stuff. You can look that up. You know, we're a company, we have products, we have people, boring. But to talk about what open and open source in general means and what it specifically should mean and could mean for the people here in the audience. When I started 12 years ago, people told me, my parents, my father actually, he said, open source, you know, you're trying to make money with stuff that everybody can download for free. How crazy is that? And I said, well, I think it's going to work. And my dad said, it's never going to work. This is stuff that, you know, this is hippie stuff and communist, socialist stuff. Don't do that. And I actually made that experience when I started at Red Hat. It was my very, very first customer I went to as a pre-sales guy at that time. It was a big bank in Switzerland. And this big bank in Switzerland, the CIO, and you know, we were sitting there, and I was doing a demonstration of our technology for 6.5 hours. And after 6.5 hours, the CIO looked at me and said, well, Mr. Wildeboer, that is very impressive what you have shown us. We find that very interesting. But we have talked to our legal department, and they have told us that open source is a socialist and communist project, and we cannot legally use that. And I was standing there like, geez, I'm from an American company, a publicly traded American company. That's definitely totally socialist and communist. I went back to that same bank in 2008 in the middle of the financial chaos, you know, when we had all all the things were going downwards and everybody was crying and stuff. And I went to that same bank, and then I went to that CEO and I said, you know, remember a few years ago we discussed open source and you told me we were communist and etc. Now let's talk about reality. 95% of the stock exchange markets on this planet, the heart of capitalism, 95% of the stock exchange markets run on Linux. 75% of them on Red Hat Linux. So I looked him in the eye and I said, you know, capitalism only works because we have communist software that's at the core of it. Think about that for a second. So we didn't become friends after that, so he never bought anything. But this is really the point that I want to stress. Everybody thinks, or a lot of people still think, that open source is something that people do in their spare time, or that's stuff for computer nerds and etc. No, it's not. It's completely running this world. This whole world, the modern world that we live in, completely runs on open source and free software. So it's extremely relevant. And we should never forget that. When you wake up in the morning and you switch on your mobile phone or your tablet or whatever, and you connect to the internet to read the news, you go through your DSL connection at home, you have this DSL router, this little box there, that's Linux in there. It runs open source. You step into your car, you have a navigation system, TomTom or Garmin or whatever, or a built-in, for sure runs Linux inside. You go to your bank, you do your banking stuff, runs on Linux. There is no way to live in the modern world without open source. And this means a lot of things. What I have learned over the years, and this is why I think this is relevant for everyone. What I've learned over the years is, I'm getting a bit technical, sorry for that. When you look at the IT stack in a company, so you have all the stuff that makes up the computer technology in a company, there are a few things that have changed over the past few years. Number one, everything is now software defined. Everything runs on software. Hardware becomes more or less irrelevant. We still have specific hardware for specific stuff, but more or less it's commodity. And in this software-defined world, what we are now seeing is companies look at this and they start to understand that 80%, round about 80% of the functions in the IT stack are non-competitive, which means this is stuff that everybody needs and everybody uses, but this doesn't set you apart in the market. This doesn't generate specific value. It doesn't make you better. It's 20% on top. That's your secret stuff. That's your secret sauce, the stuff that you really need to survive, where you generate your money, where you generate your margin. But 80% is totally non-competitive. And if it is non-competitive, and if you have other companies with this exact same setup, why not talk with each other about this? Why not work together on that 80% so that everybody can save money and time, and not everybody is reinventing the wheel? And that is what we do at Red Hat. This is our job, generate that 80%. And in that is the big opportunity. When you look through the program of the stuff that you can learn here in the next 2 days, you will see it's effectively all about open source nowadays. There's no discussion anymore. You don't see people promoting closed source proprietary stuff at a conference where you have technical people. Why? Because the people are not interested in that anymore. They want to get their hands dirty. They want to do it themselves. They want to look at it and they want to break it and put it in new ways and all that kind of things. And this is what I call the new now. This is the modern world we live in. And the big advantage of that is it's all connected through the internet, so you don't have to travel far, you don't have to move around or etc. I was asked yesterday in the car, how does it work when you want to work for Red Hat? Do you have to move to the US? Do you have to move to Germany or whatever? No, you don't. If you're a developer, you can work from home. We don't care. You're a developer, so you work on a computer. Where that computer is, as long as you have a connection to the internet, move done. Around about 70% of our engineers at Red Hat work from home. There are a few that prefer to work in the office because, again, things have changed. In the past, working at home was logical because open source people were the crazy people. You don't want to talk to them, you don't want to meet them. Nowadays, it's the norm, it's the standard. And that change is so profound. It's really a revolution that is happening and nobody's really noticing it. I'll give you some numbers to think about. There is a company in the US called Black Duck. Black Duck does research on the use of open source, specifically with regards to security. They make security analysis, etc., all that kind of stuff. And they do a survey. Every year they ask around about 5,000 companies all across the planet about what they do with open source. And here's an interesting number from last year's survey. The new one is coming out in the next 2 weeks. Last year they found out that 67% of all the companies allow their people, their developers, to work on open source code, to even commit the code they write to the upstream communities out there. So effectively working for the community paid by the company. 67% of the companies allow that to happen. And then Black Duck asked the second question, which is far more relevant. And the second question was, why are you allowing your people to do this? Why do you give your people that freedom? And the number one reply from the companies was, it's the only way to attract and retain top development talent. If you don't use open source methods, you will not attract good developers. Now that's the message I've been working on for the past 20 years in open source. I wanted the world to recognize that this is the only way to develop software, and now we're getting there, now we're winning. 5 years ago, I was on stage in another country at another conference, and I was asked about Microsoft, and Microsoft was our big enemy. We hated Microsoft. Yeah, Microsoft was evil. It's Windows. It sucks. And then 2 years ago, I got a call in the middle of the night from the CEO of Red Hat, from Jim Whitehurst, at 3 o'clock in the night, and I was like, oh my God, Jim, what's up? Jan, I know you. I know what you think about Microsoft, and here is something now. You have to be very strong. Red Hat is now in a partnership with Microsoft. And I was like, okay. So explain that to me. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, I knew exactly what it was all about. What had happened is very simple. Microsoft understood that open source is the only way, just as these numbers from Black Duck say. They had to change their whole set up completely, which they are doing right now. When you look at what Microsoft is doing now, they open source everything. The more you talk with Microsoft, the more you get the impression that effectively Microsoft invented open source, and they've always been an open source company. And it's strange that everybody thinks different. Well, I had my experiences with them, so let's leave it at that. The point is, they're developers, not the Microsoft developers themselves, but the developers working with the Microsoft tool chain. They were running away. They were running away from .NET, they were running away from Visual Basic and Visual this and Visual that, and they all went into the world of open source and Linux and web-based architectures and Ruby on Rails and all this stuff that we created. Why did they move? Not because they didn't like Microsoft anymore, but very simple, because the world had changed. We are now in a connected world. We talk about the big topics we have nowadays, which is cloud and DevOps and big data and whatever else you can find on your buzzword bingo thing. And I can reduce all of that in a very simple way and I say it's effectively all open source. That's the real change underneath. We've switched to open source technologies on all layers. So when you're a developer, when you're a technical person, when you're interested in working in the IT world and you don't know anything about open source, you will find me. I can explain you everything. That's my job. As evangelist at Red Hat, which is the weirdest job title ever, I prefer to call myself the official crazy guy from Red Hat. It's somehow the better thing. But if you don't have knowledge about open source, you can get it for free everywhere. You don't have to study it at university. You can just walk out, participate in a project, do stuff, build your reputation on that, because companies, not only Red Hat, but a lot of companies out there, they will not only Google your name to find out who you are, and they won't only check your Facebook account or other things. They will also look on GitHub and the other things to see what code have you written, how has it been accepted, what do other people think about your code. So work on those skills. It's fun. I never stopped developing when I switched to my evangelist role at Red Hat, which means more or less traveling across the world and talking all the time. But I still develop. I'm working on my home automation. I've created lots of sensors and stuff, everything open source, open hardware. And technically, when I arrive home and I open the door, there is a sensor that recognizes that somebody's entering, and then the lights should go on automatically. Most of the time it works. Sometimes I come into the room and then my vacuum cleaning robot immediately starts working because something is wrong in the logic again. But I make all of that available, and I'm not proud of it. I'm really the worst developer ever. If you see my code, you will understand. But don't be ashamed of that. We're not all experts out there. We're not all geniuses like Linus Torvalds and etc. We're normal people out there developing code that we need. So participate, work with the community, find your friends, find your peers there, and then ultimately you will also find a job there. That's just the way it works. This is how we grew from 700 to 11,000 people, by just looking at what they are doing and then hiring the best of them. Open source and an open way of thinking has only started. It's now moving away from software into more parts of the real world. Every government now, I don't know, I haven't checked the Armenian government for this, but every government is now talking about open data and open knowledge and sharing more stuff and etc. This is all part of the open source movement. You're smiling. You think Armenia is not on that level yet, or getting so we need to go there and fix that? That's okay. Another revolution. Why not? These movements about open data, open access, open knowledge, about sharing, that's all the result of the stuff that started around about 30 years ago with open source. And when you look back at how this all started, at the time this began with Richard Stallman and the Free Software Foundation and the GNU GPL, and then you look at where we are now, I find that really fascinating. I now do new hire orientations at Red Hat, so when we have new hires, we bring them all to Munich and they get beer and brainwash and the usual stuff. And now we have people that were born after Linux was created. That's kind of a milestone in my head. We now have people that have been born and grown up in a world that has known free software since like forever. Wow, that's quite an achievement. and it's not going to stop. I still have my bets open that until the end of next year, Microsoft Office will run locally on Linux, and you will not use Windows anymore. I'm almost there. You can already do it with Office 365, which is this cloud-based thingy, runs perfectly on Linux, so you can get rid of your Windows desktops now, you can get rid of all the viruses and all the other things, no more WannaCry, no more shit, just use Linux and be happy. I know it's not going to work directly. But when we look at this changing world, we see giant opportunities. I'm so happy that, you know, I'm now quite an old guy comparably, and I see the young people taking the future in their hands, and I'm quite happy that we made the tools available for that we made the way of thinking available for that. And I'm very eagerly watching what the next steps will be, what are the big developments that will happen. And I'm really hoping on local communities here in Yerevan, in other countries, to get together and do this stuff. Don't look at Silicon Valley, don't look at Germany, don't look at whatever other big hub. Don't do it. Focus on your community and your people, because you have problems here that a lot of other countries and regions also have. So if you, again, work on that 80% part of the solution stack that we need, you can build wonderful stuff right here. If you want to go to Silicon Valley or to Munich or whatever, you know, be my guest. We need people everywhere. There are a lot of smart people here in this room, and I'm totally looking forward to have you at a new hire in Munich, but I promised not to talk about Red Hat so much. So in sum, when we look back to the IT world of 20, 25 years ago, and when we look at the world we have today, it's unbelievably different. 20, 30 years ago, you had to have a lot of money to build your data center, to buy computers, to get the knowledge. Now you just switch on your computer, hook it up to Amazon or Google App Engine or Microsoft Azure, whatever, and there you have all the resources that you want. Most of the stuff you can typically use for free. So the creativity is now, it's opening for everyone. Everybody can be a user of these technologies, influence it, make it work, make crazy stuff. And please, you know, I'm not into business programming or other stuff. I like the crazy shit. So my home automation stuff has some interesting surprises, like it recognizes the MAC address of the mobile phones of my friends. So when my friends enter my apartment, when they walk upstairs already, they book into my wireless network, and then I recognize them, and that automatically causes their favorite music to play. For some friends, the music they hate the most. And for one specific friend who still thinks that I owe him money, which is not true, the moment he walks up the stairs, all the lights go down. And then I'm just not home anymore. And this, you know, you can find it on GitHub, it's all there. So you can take a look at it, and you can use it yourself. Please don't use the MAC addresses of my friends, because you might be into some surprises. But ultimately, this has created a way of working with IT that is so different. Everybody is now sharing. When I went to developer conferences 7, 8 years ago, you were going to Java conference. Oh, I love Java conferences. All of these people there, and you had a table that was company A, at the other table was company B, and in the back was company C, and they would not talk with the other companies because they were afraid that they could spill some corporate secrets, or, you know, that it would be wrong to talk to these people. And when you go to a conference nowadays, everybody is sitting together, everybody is openly talking, because they know about that 80% stuff, and they want to help each other. They want to help the other people to not make the mistakes they made themselves. And this spreading of knowledge is unbelievably important for the future of IT. I fear, now let's come to the dark part, when I look at cloud computing and etc., I fear that we are losing a lot of knowledge in this part of the stack that we cannot control and own anymore. I don't like that. I want to build my own stuff, but I fully understand that you have to use these whole stacks, but insist on understanding how everything works. You know, don't ignore the stuff underneath. It's really important to really know how stuff works so that you can optimize it, and if something goes wrong, you can move away to another provider. Understand the technology to the fullest extent that you can. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to become a Linux kernel hacker. You don't have to become good at assembly or understanding the different processor architectures. But please do not give up understanding how this stuff all works. First of all, it's fascinating, it's interesting. People in my office, they play computer games all the time, and don't talk about that too much because, you know, it's official working hours, but they say it's for testing networks and etc. And I never did that. My last computer game I played was 1986, I guess. 1986 on an Atari ST, and the game was called Gold Runner, and it was a shoot-'em-up game. Since then, my games have always been looking inside a computer. How does stuff work? How does this software work? Which also explains how I got to open source then. And now that I made it my job, which is like paradise, now I can look into everything and I have the experts at hand and I can call them. So I spend my times in my hotel room not watching television, but going through mailing lists and reading code. I know it's weird. Maybe I should go out more and have more fun at a bar or whatever, but I like code, so that's it. If we look at the program of the conference, if we see all the different stuff that are offered here, it's the direct result of that way of thinking. When you look at the growth of this event over the years, you know, how you started, I guess quite small with just a few people, and how now the rooms are all filled and etc. It's not only because the conference is good, it's because the people want to discuss, want to share, and want to become part of a bigger community. And this community, this global community of open source and open source development, is one of the most precious things that we have ever generated. So let's keep it alive and make sure that all the young people can join too. That's another big fear I have. In a lot of open source communities, people are getting old. And when you get old, I know it from myself, and I specifically know it from looking at my parents. When you get old, you start to get less flexible in your opinion. You think you know everything, your experience and etc., and you start to ignore the crazy ideas of the younger people, even if they're wrong. You know, let them make mistakes. That's important. That's how you learn. So we, elder of the open source community, we must learn to take back and give our wisdom in the right way as a motivating thing, but not as, you know, teaching people stuff too much. This will be part of my presentation tomorrow, or workshop-like, where I talk about social architecture. Social architecture is 30 years of experience with open source communities, the lessons learned, and it leads to wider lessons about what you can do in a societal level, in a company level, on what you can learn from open source in a lot of other fields. The theory there was written by a good friend of mine, Peter Hintjens. Peter unfortunately died last year, but he wrote some very interesting books about how to do this stuff, how to have a working community and how to make sure that people stay motivated, how to help people when they get a burnout or when they run into other problems. How do you help these people? Because that's also part of being a community. We are here to help each other and not only ourselves. And that's what Microsoft is learning the hard way now. And that's very good that they're learning that. I'm now going to Microsoft events doing presentations about open source. I never dreamt that would ever happen. Sometimes I still feel a little bit dirty afterwards and I need to take a shower. And I'm not hoping that Oracle does the same thing, because then I will have to go to Oracle, and that's something I definitely do not want to do. Let me see, I still have only a few minutes. So, putting everything together, what we have learned over the last 10, 15 years is that we can really change this world completely. 15 years ago, the people looked at a company like Red Hat and said, this is never going to work. You might become, you know, a little company and you might make a little bit of money, that's fine, but it will never become big. Now we are 2 billion in revenue. We have changed the whole IT world. Everybody is now looking at open source. Not necessarily only at Red Hat. There are a lot of other companies out there doing similar stuff. But it is going to be the future for a very long time. This is not going away. And we are as radical as we have always been about this. Everything we do at Red Hat must be open source, no exception. And if you want to work that same way, talk to me. I'll gladly help you with that. And now enjoy the rest of the conference, enjoy the show, and maybe we'll meet again tomorrow in my other presentation. I have another half an hour. Oh my God. This was not part of the plan. But but not a full half hour, because even though I'm funny, it gets boring after a little bit of time. I mean, I can do the crazy things to cheer everyone up. This is what. So yeah, we will. Yeah, that's a good thing. We will have a question part, but first the crazy thing. So when you work at Red Hat for a long time, you get this. And no, I got it myself. So there is this running joke in Red Hat that when you are 10 years at the company, you get a free tattoo. And some people are fearing that, and then they're like, "Oh my God, do I have to look like the crazy guy?" And but I got mine, and this is, by the way, an interesting part. I got mine, I think, 8 years ago when I was in the US, directly at corporate headquarters, and I said I want to have a Red Hat tattoo, and everybody was like, "Okay, why not?" So they found a tattoo shop for me, and we organized everything, and then I said, "Okay, but we have to do this the right way." And the right way means it has to be perfectly okay. So first I went to the Red Hat brand department, and we had the colors checked. Are the colors brand compatible? Is that good? And then I took the next step, and I went to the legal department. And I went to the Red Hat general counsel, Michael Cunningham, a very important guy. And I said, "I need a license for a tattoo." And he looked at me like, "Are you fucking crazy?" And I said, "Michael, you're the general counsel. I have an appointment tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. It's now 2 in the afternoon. Can you organize?" And the counsel looked at me and he was like, "Okay." So they did. And they went through all of the stuff. They found out during that process that if they write me a Red Hat tattoo license, that this tattoo license is a legal document, and a legal document that must be accepted into the corporate body of Red Hat, which means you need to have full board approval. So our poor general counsel spent half the night calling the directors all over the US and had them sign and fax in their agreement to it, and etc. And it was done. The last one came in at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then Michael came to me and said, "Jan, here's the paperwork, 20 pages. I still have them at home. Now you have the official Red Hat tattoo license." Why am I telling this story? Because I think that following the rules and the laws and the regulations is relevant and important. We open source people are not rebels. As this guy from the Swiss bank said, we're communists and socialists and we disregard property. Actually not. We have built our whole system on the existing rules of the copyright system and all that kind of stuff. We even are able to go to court with that. I did that in the year 2000, so before I joined Red Hat. I took the GPL to a German court because somebody took the code that I've written, renamed it, put his name on it, and claimed that he wrote it, which is not acceptable. But it was open source, it was GPL licensed, so I said to him, I'm going to get you in front of a court, and we're going to do this in a not-so-friendly way because you refuse to talk to me in a friendly way. And he said, "Go to court. No court will ever accept the GPL." That was his biggest mistake. It took the judge exactly 5 minutes, and then he looked at me and he looked at the other side and the lawyer, and he said, I'm going to the toilet now for 10 minutes, and I hope when I come back you have an agreement on this, because else," and then he looked the other lawyer in the eye and said, "Else, I'm not sure, but it's not looking good." And the other lawyer was, no, we want to have a decision. So he got his decision. The GPL was fully accepted, and they offered me money. So the court said, "Do you want money? Do you want something?" I said, "No, I don't want money. I just want to have this thing that the GPL is absolutely valid in the European justice system." So we work with these laws and regulations. We are not really the rebels that question everything, that want to change everything radically. Well, we do most of the time, but we have to do it in a system that is already there. You cannot propose a revolutionary change just like that. It doesn't work that way. What works is to work inside the system, show it how ridiculous it is, how crazy it is, and then show a better alternative. Build a golden bridge to your better alternative, and then things start rolling. This is one of my favorite hobbies when I go into companies and change the minds and brainwash them into something new. When I tell them the 80% story, they look at me like, yeah, that explains almost everything. And then we stop talking about products and I can sell open source solutions everywhere. So try as an open source developer, as an open source person, you must change everything all the time. Nothing is constant. In our world of software, everything is worthless after 3 years. Every piece of code you write will be rewritten in 3 years. So don't be too proud of your code. Just focus on the process of creating it and get better at that process. This is, again, what I will talk about more in depth tomorrow. And before I run out of interesting stuff to say, I will run around with my microphone and ask, and you can ask any questions you want about all the crazy stuff that I just told and anything else, and then we will fill that half an hour with more interaction because I'm sick and tired of talking all the time. So who has a question? Oh, wow, so professional. Whoa, 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 I feel like a politician. The microphones are to the left and to the right. Please line up, everybody, exactly one question. Thank you.
Okay, hello. My question is on regarding to Oracle. I don't know how much you like talking about that, but the question is with products like Oracle Linux, for example, or similar. Is there a threat for open source community for them taking the code, even with all the GPLs, etc., and making business out of it? I don't know, even with contributing back, but making a business and even forcing their clients to use their Linux, which is the same as your Linux. And sorry, the second part is how do we defend it?
So to answer the first, is Oracle a dangerous company for open source in general and free software in general? Yes, of course. Every company that is as aggressive as they are is a risk. But is it really a problem? No, it's not. The good thing about Oracle Linux, for those who don't know, it was created around about, I think, 5-6 years ago, 7 years ago. Oracle decided that it's not good for Red Hat to be such a big company. And so we are an open source company. So they took all of the source code of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, created their own version of Linux called Oracle Enterprise Linux. And then they told their customers you can use Oracle Enterprise Linux effectively for free. It's 100% compatible with Red Hat. So you don't have to pay Red Hat any money anymore and you get the same stuff. Isn't that a good deal? We lost exactly one very big customer to Oracle Linux. You know which company? Oracle. All of the rest understood, and this is where the business model comes into play. So we told our customers, it was perfectly fine, use Oracle Linux, but it's not Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which means the stuff that we do beyond software, the certification of hardware and software, the partnering with the manufacturers of servers and all that kind of stuff, doesn't count for them. Oracle has to reproduce all of that too. So this is how we defend ourselves. Oracle Linux exists, other people have tried the same thing. We're totally okay with that. This is the world of open source. We want to have competition. I don't want Red Hat to become the Microsoft of free software. That's one of my biggest fears. We need to stay an open source company, and that means we have to accept this. Defending against it is the best thing is doing with quality. Show the customers that we are worth our money, that we are doing the good thing by giving them new products, new solutions, training, consultants, and all of that kind of stuff. That will keep the customer happy. When we would move into a lock-in scenario like Oracle does, Oracle locks their customers in and then says, if you want to run an Oracle database in a virtualized environment, you can only do it with our virtualization, which is effectively Red Hat's old virtualization. But okay, that's the way it is. If you do it with VMware or other things, you're not allowed to do that. That will not work forever. Oracle as a company, Oracle as a company, look at their numbers. Their core business of databases isn't really growing anymore. They grow by buying other companies and doing stuff. At Red Hat, that's completely different. We just make everything open source and create our customers. So we don't fear them too much. It's okay. We're happy with them.
Thank you.
More or less. Who wants? Go.
Can I? Okay. In your talk, you mentioned some other evangelist, Richard Stallman.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you are well aware of his views on some of the terms you've used, like Linux or open source?
Remember, when you talk about Richard, always say GNU/Linux.
Yes,
Very important.
yes. It was coming. Like, I'm GNU/Linux user, and I'm assuming that it would be proper to say free software and not open source. You know obviously what I'm talking about, and so my question is this: why not use those terms?
Well, that's so. For those who don't know, let me give you my version. My version is, and Richard agrees with that. He doesn't like to talk about that, but he agrees with that because it's fundamentally right. All free software is open source, but not all open source software is free software. And that allows me, so there is a difference between open source and free software, and it's mostly based on licensing. I would say in the business world that I primarily work in, the people they don't really care about those differences. And I also don't care as long as they install more free software and more open source into their companies. Then it's perfectly fine with me. Insisting on a specific term typically makes you look bad in a bigger setup. It doesn't really work. And Richard is perfectly fine with it. I've talked to him about it. What do you think about this? He hates the term open source for obvious reasons. But that's more or less a personal vendetta he has with the creators of the term open source. I can give you the full story this evening over a few beer, and then you will see why.
Okay.
I think it is, I fully agree, it is important to know about the difference between free software and open source. That's relevant. You must always be able to explain that. But if it's about getting someone to move away from Microsoft, from the proprietary world, into the world of free software, I'll let him go with open source first,
Yes.
and then we can
Okay.
talk about it in detail
And
once he understands.
one more question. In Red Hat, do you use GPL version 2 or 3?
Depends. We have, so at Red Hat, there is no rule about that. You know, Red Hat...
Which is more acceptable for you?
All of them are acceptable. So we have GPL version 2 for a lot of things. We have LGPL for a lot of the middleware stuff. We have Apache license for a lot of the web-related stuff. We have BSD license, depending on the licensing of upstream projects. Internally, we say, we have a set of rules, and we say we prefer GPL for stuff that is not going to be used as an integrative part for other software. So for basic, for basic libraries and then other things, definitely GPL. For stuff that gets integrated, LGPL. And for the other stuff, depending on upstream. Because, you know, we don't create much software at Red Hat. It's upstream communities out there. But we only accept code into our products that is perfectly compliant with the open source definition and the free software definition. That's the fundamental rule.
Okay, thank you.
Or? No.
How do fully open source companies like Red Hat earn money?
So, let's go back to 1993 when Red Hat was created as a company. It was Bob Young and Mark Ewing. Bob Young was a publisher. Mark Ewing was a student at university who had created a Linux distribution which he called the Red Hat Halloween Edition. And the reason he called it Red Hat was always wearing a red baseball cap. And Bob Young went to him and said, okay, I like your distribution, I want to sell it as a publisher, so can you send me 300 CDs? And Mark was like, geez, I only plan to make 300 CDs. That's how they started to talk to each other, and that's how Red Hat was created. Then we had the first round investors with a little bit of money. It was not much, maybe $1 million or something. And Bob Young and Mark and the investors were sitting at a table, and the investors said, well, Bob, you got our money. What's the business plan? What do you plan to do with the money? And Bob looked at him and said, well, we could sell coffee mugs with the Red Hat logo or backpacks, because one of the things was extremely clear from the very beginning. Red Hat doesn't sell software. It's open source, so it's available for everyone. What we did is we created a layer above, a support and service layer, where we package the stuff, so when you look at Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we generate a new version every 2 to 3 years, We stabilize that, and then we give the promise that the APIs and ABIs in there stay the same for 10 years. So backporting features that are from upstream into that 10-year guaranteed version, that's the work our customers pay for. And they do that by buying a subscription from Red Hat. So with a subscription, which is 1 or 3 years, per core or per socket, with this subscription, they get the right to get all the software that we offer them. So not only the current version, you don't buy a subscription for Red Hat Enterprise Linux version 6, you buy a subscription for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. If you use 5, 6, or 7, that's up to you. With this model, we give the customer the absolute freedom to use whatever he sees fit and whatever he needs, but we also make sure that we can continue to develop new products and make them available with a steady stream of income. So that's the core of our business model. Subscriptions for open source software, offering stability, doing backports, doing security patching and all that kind of stuff. All of the work that you can totally do yourself. You can just take our source code and do everything yourself. It's no problem. We even have a how-to on how to create a Red Hat compatible Linux distribution. It's just step by step how to do it. But if you want to have our support, our certifications, our service level agreements, all that kind of stuff, then you pay us. That's the business model in a nutshell.
Thank you.
No more questions. You have 10 seconds to think that over. Because if there are no more questions, and we still have 15 minutes to go, correct? Then I could start dancing or something else. But I won't do that, I won't bore you. I will just close it then 15 minutes earlier. Sorry for that. All right. So now, okay, I'll give you one anecdote it's only one. It's an anecdote, it's true by the way, I'm not lying. But it's a perfect example of how crazy the open source world is. So, you know that big users of open source solutions are organizations that we all don't like too much. Secret services, military, and etc. The big users of open source. One of our biggest customers at Red Hat is the NSA, the National Security Agency, the evil guys that spy on your telephone and everything. So whenever you think about the NSA spying on your WhatsApp chats or your Facebook stuff and etc., there's one positive thing, it all runs on Linux. So, and the NSA had a problem a long time ago. They were using Sun before they switched to Linux. They were using Solaris and it was getting too expensive. And they have very strict rules on security. It's the Bell LaPadula security model about a lot of technology and etc. And it simply wasn't in Linux, didn't exist. So they programmed it themselves. They changed the kernel, and they added all of these features and then all of this stuff. And then they came to us and said, hey, we made a new version of the kernel, and we want you to support it. And we said, we cannot do that. We're Red Hat. We cannot support code that we cannot see because they wanted to keep it hidden. And the NSA looked at us and said, well, how can we change that? We said, oh, it's simple. You give us the code and we make it upstream. And the NSA was like, just a second. We just written secret code for secret stuff, and you want us to make it open source. Yeah, if you want to have support from us, it must be upstream in the kernel because we only support stuff that is upstream. We're an open source company. They thought about it and actually understood what we meant with that, and they did it. They made, it's called SA Linux, Security Enhanced Linux. It was put into the kernel with a 2.6 version. It was made available to the rest of the world. Linus Torvalds looked at it and saw it was good code, it was accepted, and we use it in Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and it's wonderful, highly secure, super military grade level security, the best you can get, blah, blah, blah. 3 years later, the NSA calls again. And the NSA is, well, Red Hat, we made this as a Linux stuff open source, yeah. So it's now in the kernel upstream, yeah. Under GPL version 2, yes. And GPL version 2 says that everybody can use it, yes. No field of use restrictions, absolute freedom to use and redistribute and etc. Fundamental freedoms of software. Yeah, so North Korea can use SA Linux. Yeah. Iran can use SA Linux. Yeah. Well, that's against the US embargo against these countries. Oh, oops. So Red Hat, you helped us make it upstream. Now that we have changed our mind, can you help us take it out again? And we said, that's not possible. This is not how open source works. And we explained to them how the GPL works and what it means when you make code available under GPL, and that you cannot simply take it back and you cannot claim any rights because that was all agreed beforehand. So the NSA had to accept it, which they did. Ultimately, their legal department looked at it and said, okay, yeah, we cannot do anything about it. But, you know, it's weird to think about North Korea using NSA technology to protect themselves. I don't know if they do it. Honestly, I don't know. But it could happen. And this is the weird stuff that happens in the open source world. This is maybe not stuff you read in the newspapers all the time, but this is just how stuff works. There's a positive story, which I will close then, and then I'm really done. We have another customer called Amadeus. Now, I guess nobody here knows Amadeus, the company, has ever heard of them. Who knows Amadeus? Okay. Who has ever taken a flight with an airplane? Who has ever flown? Then you all know Amadeus. Amadeus is the travel organization company that does the ticketing for almost all airlines on this planet. So whenever you book a ticket on an airplane, it goes typically through the Amadeus systems. More than 90% of the seats in commercial airliners. They're a huge company. And they're a European company. And they had a problem. 7 years ago, they got a call from HP, and HP told them that their system that they were having, HP UX, Oracle databases, etc., was reaching the limits of scalability. They couldn't grow their system anymore. HP refused to, it was done. It was the end. This was it. So they had to think about a new solution. And they did. They thought very hard about their architecture, which was this giant Oracle database with all the information at your fingertips. In milliseconds, they had everything. And they thought about this and said, it doesn't really make sense. It gets too expensive anyway. So a simple example, so let's take this empty seat there and let's imagine it's on the flight from Yerevan to Moscow, whatever. This seat there, when you book it, or when you make it available as an airline, people will look at it and people will reserve it or not, and etc. In the past, when we were going through travel agencies, every seat in an airplane got round about 50 queries. So 50 times some system asked if the seat is available or tried to reserve it. Nowadays, and I'm not kidding, nowadays with Expedia and online price comparison stuff and etc., that same seat gets 100,000 queries before it's booked. So that scale from 50 queries to 100,000 queries, that's what their systems have to deal with. And they saw it didn't work. So they thought about something completely different. They said, let's get away from the central database. Let's have very small objects that contain all the data for one single flight, and we put all the stuff in there, the seats, the passengers, the crew, the landing rights, the weather information, fuel, blah, 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 all that stuff. They were, at that time the word didn't exist, but they were creating microservices before the term even existed. And they were thinking about how to do that. And they looked at the IT world and they saw in the IT world a new trend coming up, which was platform as a service. And they found a little startup company called Makara who did this stuff that somehow went into the direction that they want. So they started playing with that. And after a few months, they got a call from us, from Red Hat, where we told them, hey, Amadeus, good to talk to you. We just want to inform you, we just bought Makara. We are going to make that a big product. It's going to be completely open source, of course. We're going to call it OpenShift, and you are one of the very few paying customers that Makara had. So we want to discuss with you, what are you doing with it and how can we make it better? And they said, well, Red Hat, that's good, because we're going to bet the company on this. We're going to change everything to this architecture. And we have a long list of requirements that we want. They came with 300 pages of requirements. We looked at that and we said, we cannot implement that. It's impossible. We bought a company with 40 developers. We cannot simply add 200 developers on top of that to implement all of that. Doesn't make sense. But this is open source. So, dear Amadeus, you know what you want. You wrote all the requirement lists. You have 5,000 developers working for you. It's a huge company. Why don't you write all that code? And they were like, yeah, why not? Yeah. And then, when you have written all the code, you give it to us, to Red Hat, for free. And then we will put it into our product called OpenShift. And then you will pay for that product. So you are going to pay to use the code you've written yourself. How about that? And the CIO of Amadeus looked at us for 10 seconds, like, and then he suddenly understood and he said, yeah, we're going to do it that way. We're going to do it exactly that way. Why? Because Amadeus is not a software company. Amadeus is a travel organization. And the part of maintaining software, of packaging it, of delivering the patches and security stuff, etc., is not their core business. It's in that 80% of the stuff you don't make money with. So why should they invest their money in something that is, in that case, not relevant for them? But it's our business. This is what we do at Red Hat. And they saw that all of this, the features, the requirements they had, they were also in that 80%, so it wasn't really relevant. And we did exactly that. OpenShift version 3 was for a big part written by one of our customers. So we have offices where the developers of Amadeus and Red Hat and from the community are sitting together and developing this stuff. Then we found out that a container, at that time we had the term containers, that one container is not enough to manage this whole transaction for a plane. So you need more than one container, and that means you need to orchestrate it. Now, we started out being arrogant as we always are and said, okay, let's write an orchestration layer. Didn't work. That's really hard work. But then another company knocked on our door and said, hey, hi, we're Google, we're cool. And we at Google, we have an orchestration layer, and it's managing 9 billion containers as we speak. And the project is called Borg, like, you know, the Borg from Star Trek. And we want to make it open source, and we need Red Hat's help because you know this stuff. And we said, okay, but we cannot call it the Borg because then, you know, you have these companies, copyright companies. So it was renamed to Kubernetes. And now we have Amadeus, Google, Red Hat, community developers sitting together, integrating all of that, working on that, and making stuff better. And this is our future at Red Hat. I don't, to put it in radical words, I don't want to have customers. I want to have co-creators and partners, and we work together this way on that 80%. And with that, I'm perfectly on time to stop. Am I allowed to stop now? Yes. Thank you for listening so much.